We've all worked crap jobs, but sometimes there can be a lot of funny stories that go along with that crap job. Now, invariably, if you're going to be in this business anytime at all, you will end up working for one of these companies to where the management is completely clueless, nobody knows what's going on, and all the hilarity that ensues because it's a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe of epic proportions. But a lot of weird things happen, but that when you look back are actually quite funny. And I started thinking about one of those companies that I was at for 13 months out of Waterloo, Iowa. And I've talked about him before. I started off getting hired for one company that ended up getting bought out by another company. And the company that bought them out, and from what I understand, it was a hostile takeover. These guys, the owner had literally zero idea what was going on because he trusted the people under him. The people under him were doing their own thing, which led to just absolute chaos. So I thought it'd be funny to tell a few stories from there. Now, one of the things that this company had a problem with was they never knew where their equipment was. But I tell you, they didn't know where things were. They just didn't know. Somebody was supposed to be keeping track, but apparently nobody was. Well, because we'd just find trailers everywhere. And when the boss would go buy trailers, he wouldn't buy just used trailers, like from the second owner. He wouldn't be the second owner. He'd be like the fifth owner. And these trailers are, half of these trailers I found out had been storage trailers till he bought them. So we were pulling around old 48-foot trailers. Well, he had a trailer disappear in Chicago. That's not uncommon. We had a lot of things disappear in Chicago. So, trailer disappears. About 3 months later, he doesn't know it's gone. He gets a phone call. Are you guys going to come get your trailer? Like, what? What trailer? They give him the number. They're like, what do you mean? Why is it there? Well, that's why I asked you. It's been sitting here for 3 months. And somebody had stolen the trailer. They had taken the air ride out. They had put a spring ride under it to move it with 4 tires on it, 4 wheels and tires, bald of course, and stolen the refrigerated unit off it. So my boss, being the thrifty guy that he was, goes out, grabs 4 more used tires, slams them on there, drags it back to Waterloo, slams a reefer unit on it that I'm sure was probably 10 years older than the trailer. And as far as I know, the last time I saw that trailer, that was still going down the road about 10 years ago. I mean, he got his life out of it. That trailer was 20 years old when it was stolen. And it was 30 years old the last time I saw it. So, he was, that's the kind of stuff we were dealing with. Just trailers were disappearing all the time. But not just trailers. We had a truck too. So Star Trucking out of Morton, Illinois, before they went under, decided to update their fleet, and they had a bunch of 377 Peterbilts that were shot. So my boss gets a great deal on them. Now these are wore out Peterbilt 377s with C12s in them. I think he had a couple of C13s, but they were going through 1.5 gallons of oil a day. I mean, these things change their own oil weekly. And so he buys like 10 of them, and they're just junk. Well, one of his drivers gets a DUI, actually down in Hayesville, Kansas, not too far from where I'm at, where I live now. And so they drag it over to the South 40, which was a bar at the time, on the south end of Hayesville. Park it there. Somebody comes down, grabs the trailer, takes off with it. They leave the truck. They forgot the truck was there. That truck sat there 8 months. One day I'm driving by there, I'm looking at it, so I decided to go over and check it out. Now, mind you, RBS doesn't exist anymore, but this was still striped up. So the registration's out, The company doesn't exist anymore. The DOT numbers have been null and voided. It's just done. And the steer tire's flat. Somebody stole all the batteries. Somebody stole the radio. I mean, things were just gone out of this truck. So I call the company. I'm like, dude, you've got to get this out of here. It's at the bar. Things are disappearing off it. And I said, and truthfully, Kansas law says after it sits here 30 days, they can file a lien on it and charge you storage, and they can keep it. You've got to get it. So, in their infinite wisdom, I go back up, I grab a guy, he's going to come down and grab it. And we get the thing fired up. They send a mechanic out there to grab some batteries, and they get it fired up, surprisingly. Well, they decide that the guy that had the truck, he needed to pick up his truck, so he parks it at the Flying J in Kansas City, where it's sat another week. Well, I go by there, I check on it. Well, the tire's flat. I air up the tire. I move it to another spot. So then I go by there like a week and a half later. It's still there. I call him again. I was like, dude, it's going to get towed within the week if you don't get it. So they finally get it back, but it took almost 10 months before. It took 8 months when they realized the truck was missing, and almost 10 months to get the truck back up to Waterloo. You know, and the good times didn't stop there. One of the things we used to argue with this employer about was tires. He would not change a tire until it blew. So he'd sit there running tires that you'd have 1.5 feet of cord showing, but if it didn't blow, and then he'd want you to bring the tire back. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was trying to find a tire to put on. He would fight with people over an $85 used tire. I mean, that's not a joke. He wouldn't want to pay for it. And I just have no idea where this came from. I have a feeling it was the management under the owner, because the owner was fairly clueless to what was going on most of the time. I'd like to not believe that, but that's just the way it seemed. So, yeah, actually, we were blowing tires everywhere, but getting them changed, nope. Now, while tires were a big deal, what it ended up doing was creating a reputation among the DOT. We had some shagged equipment, so we were missing tags. We were always missing tags, mud flaps. It didn't take long to figure out a violation. I'm not going to be too hard on the old man. He hires people to run his company. Well, the problem was that the people he had hired to run his company had decided to make it their own personal fiefdom. Not uncommon when you have management that's clueless. But, sorry. But what ended up happening was they took advantage of it. And so they were kind of just doing their own thing. They were just spoon feeding them stuff. Now, truthfully, it did all come back to bite them, as it always does, because old men, even though they're old, when they get angry and they own companies, they clean house because that's what they do, which he ended up doing. But the damage had been done. So some of these trailers, you know, they were just junk. But he'd been told that they were good. But anyhow, I'm gonna be getting ready to go here. I'm up here in Tomah, Wisconsin again. It's cold. It says it's 25 degrees, but we'll wait and see what happens when we get out on the road. So, with the trailers being bad, we were being run like outlaws, which a lot of us didn't have any problem with until they just really got bad there for a while. And we were just kind of encouraged to do whatever we needed to do. Mileage was not an issue. But when you have companies where you have to do what you need to do, sometimes the employees they hire are a little special. Now, due to the fact that this was a cutthroat operation, maintenance suffered. If you could fix it yourself, you were just better off. Because getting things fixed on the road was never a good idea. Because it was always a fight. But we had one particular mechanic. It was basically the head mechanic, because he's the only guy that had lasted. And they hoarded everything. But if it was broken and funny, he had an old Astro van that he put all sorts of chicken lights on, and he put all sorts of broken horn. It was the funniest looking thing you'd ever seen. He had this old beat to crap Astro van that had rust on all four corners, but he had every external accoutrement for a truck tacked on that. It was his work van. He just had fun. But chances are, though, if something broke and you had to get it fixed, it was getting fixed with a slightly less broken part than they took off. And that broken part they took off, unless it was completely shagged, they wouldn't throw it away. They'd throw it in the pile and use it when they got a more broken part that they could replace it with. It was an interesting place, the shop. Now, mind you, when it came to trailers, time to time, actually a lot of times, they would have to rent trailers. The trailers they were trying to use would just be so shot, or they weren't available, or a pallet had fallen through the floor of one. We'll get to that story. That's happened more than twice. But so they would lease trailers. Now, he leased a bunch of trailers from Sharkey because he needed storage trailers. These were old reefers. The reefers didn't work, or they needed service, or something was wrong. But all he needed was 7 trailers to sit in the yard to store parts in until he could, like, put up a building or something like that, or get something cleaned out. So he goes and he rents these trailers. Well, one of those people under him that, you know, thought they owned the place, they go through, well, they start flipping levers on reefers, and one fires up. A couple of them fire up. Now, mind you, these were not supposed to leave the yard. These were storage trailers. So the first thing it does, it fires up, it runs. She says, take it over to Tyson and get it loaded. They went over, Tyson fired it up, got it loaded, got the load pulled out of the yard, the trailer goes down. The trailer goes down. The trailer goes down. And it was just an absolute nightmare. Thankfully, I didn't have to deal with that. Now, the boss did interject on that. He was mad. I mean, he was really mad. He said, I told you. And that tells you nobody was listening. Now, do this while we're idling around in the parking lot here. Now, when I told you about pallets falling through the floors of these trailers, that wasn't a joke. I loaded up at Campbell's one time, and I got looking under it, and there was a pallet hanging down like that. And I just let it go. But they would get these 48-foot trailers like we talked about, and you wouldn't think a 48-footer would be that heavy. And it's really not. But it would be when you were welding half-inch aluminum plates in the floor, because the floors had all cracked. So I had to pick up a load and take it up to, where was that? Jeffersonville, Wisconsin, I think. They used to have that Dockesil plant up there. It's Tyson plant. I don't know what it is now. So the loads were on slip sheets. So now I blame this on the forklift driver because they were slip sheets. He was just putting the fork down and just running under him. He hit that plate and that combo exploded. And they wanted to yell at me like it was my fault. Like they were going to reject the load, this, that, the other thing. But what they didn't know is they had a little window right there and you could watch them. And I said, you know, I watched your forklift driver. He wasn't pulling things on. He was just driving under him. So this is your mess. And they had to go in there with a bucket and shovels and shovel it all out. And then when I had to get over there to Oak Creek, Wisconsin to wash it out, because I was loading up at standard forwarding, and you know, get all that washed out. And boy, that the Blue Beacon guys, they were not impressed. The dock plate had literally was sitting at about an 85-degree angle. In order to get it out, I had to get in there with a sledgehammer and beat it down. Now, while I do talk about there was a lot of funny things, at the time, the majority of it wasn't funny because us drivers were the ones paying for it. Bad management is toxic. And bad management in this case was one of the more extreme cases I've ever seen, because truthfully, in a lot of places I've worked, bad management will last a while, but it's eventually rooted out. But the problem at this company was it had become so ingrained with the day-to-day operations. Even the bosses, one of the boss's kids that worked in the office, a couple of his kids just quit. They just were, well, they couldn't do it anymore because the boss was listening to people who were completely unaccountable, and his kids are like, hey, these people are screwing you, you know, and it got that bad. So at that point, the business just became completely unmanageable, and it took another several years to root one particular person out, and then they just had to start peeling the onion away to get out of it. And there was a time they did start coming back. They got rid of all the junk trucks. They started leasing trucks. They drive better trucks now, not by much. And they started buying trailers that had only had 2 previous owners instead of 19. But when you really start to think about it, this is what happens when management runs amok. You know, just poor management, but the management was trying to run the company like they owned it. And they were just basically, like I said, they were just basically spoon feeding the boss just what they thought he wanted to hear, just to keep him quiet so they could basically business as usual. And it did implode. The company has a horrible reputation, and it's taken a lot to come back from it. So that's basically the ultimate result of things of that nature. So y'all are probably wondering why I was working there in the first place. You know, 20 years ago, you just couldn't take time off. People had their choice of who they wanted to hire. They always said there was a driver's shortage, but most of the time we've been hearing that same line. One of these days I'll do a video on that. But what ended up happening back then was companies had their pick and choose. So if you had any gaps in your employment history, because I took about 6 months off and thought I wanted to be home, and that didn't work. So when I come back out, I was just almost unhireable. Ooh, that's not good. I was almost unhireable because people didn't want gaps. So the only, they had their pick and choose of their employees. So the only people that really were hiring were a lot of bottom-feeding companies. And unfortunately, back then, what you had to do, you had to get on with just basically a really bad company and get a little history behind you. It was usually 6 months to a year. A year if you wanted a good job, because people wanted to see continuity. And then you could start applying and go other places. And truthfully, that's what I did. I spent 13 months there before I landed another job, and I landed a really good job after that. And the minute I quit, I never heard from them again. you know, unlike a lot of guys I know that quit, they'd hound them and beg them to come back, and never heard from these guys again. Bad management is toxic. And when you start seeing things of this nature, because bad management trickles down and eventually they start hiring people to fill a quota to make their numbers look good, rather than paying a little extra money and hiring good people. They just fill slots because there's money and they're just running their own private show. Bad management is toxic. So if you're at a place where you're starting to see a lot of this happening, start looking up, because the management, you're going to see management doing a lot of odd things, and that can be one of two things. Either there's some growth spurts, changes, or management has changed. Like, I've been through a lot of changes in managements where the kids will take over or the company moves from here to there, and, you know, change is always inevitable. But if that's not happening and you're seeing a lot of things happening, start looking at seeing what's going on in middle and upper management. And usually, if you're intuitive enough, you'll figure it out. And then you can start making educated decisions whether this is a place you want to stay. So, it's just, I got started on one video and I kind of ended it with another, just because I started thinking about everything I was going through and everything I was seeing. It was just cheap, crazy, and toxic. And you know the signs and know what to look for, man. Start looking for a good company and you'll find it. So I appreciate it. This video took a little longer. That's why I'm in my car right now. But home for a few days, which happen to be the coldest days of the month. So I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Hope this video was fun and informative, and we'll see you next video.